So lately, I've been seeing a lot of people making the false claim that Black Americans are the largest recipients of welfare in the United States, and that's just not true. Whites overwhelmingly make up the largest beneficiaries of welfare programs in the United States. But this data can tell us something super important about welfare policy in the United States. More importantly, it talks about the history and systemic racism. Let's get into it. White Americans make up about 56% of the U.S. population, but only about 43% of welfare recipients. That means they are underrepresented in this data. Also, Black Americans only make up about 14% of the U.S. population, but 23% of welfare recipients, which means they are overrepresented. What's going on? So this is where then we start getting into the history of the United States, in particular the history of systemic racism, starting with slavery, because the history of slavery left many generations of Black Americans in extreme poverty with no way to get out of it. And at no point did the United States ever do anything to rectify that situation. Immediately following slavery, we entered Jim Crow. And Jim Crow had policies like redlining, which prevented Black Americans from finding success. So let's talk about what redlining was. When people would go to borrow money from banks, banks would literally look at the neighborhood they lived in to determine whether or not they got a loan. They would have neighborhoods marked in green and neighborhoods marked in red. Take a wild guess at who lived in those neighborhoods that were marked in red. Also, at the same time that this was happening, the United States government offered several $1,000,000, which would be several billion today, to homeowners to fix up their homes or their neighborhoods or to buy new homes. Only 2% of that money was made available to Black Americans. Redlining ensured that Black Americans could not escape the impoverished neighborhoods that they had been trapped in. But it also ensured that white Americans could always escape poverty, which is why white Americans are underrepresented here. Now, prior to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, America really believed in welfare. We thought that welfare was a great thing because Black Americans could not get it. So, for instance, coming back from World War II, Black Americans were just overwhelmingly denied the GI Bill. They could not get the GI Bill. They could not get small business loans or homeowners loans, even if they served their country in World War II. But going back to welfare, when white America was able to just give it to white America, we really believed in it. We thought that if a woman lost her husband for any reason, whether he died, whether he ran away, whether he divorced her, she should be allowed to stay home and take care of her children and not have to work, that her house should be paid for, that she should have a salary, that her food should be paid for her kids and the doctor's visits. And we paid for that as part of the aid to needy families. But then the 1964 Civil Rights Act happened, and suddenly Black mothers were also eligible for the same welfare benefits. And suddenly we see a shift where white America says we are building a nation of entitlement, and we have to cut welfare spending. And so this move shifts from women being able to stay home and take care of their kids to TANF, which is temporary assistance to needy families. And that really makes it harder on families where you actually make less money if you work because you're not getting paid very much and you don't get as many benefits. So this sets up a system where people can't get the assistance that they need. And this is by design. In the 1930s, when the first welfare acts were put into place, one of those was the aid to families with dependent children. That was part of the 1935 Social Security Act. At the time, the Dixiecrats said that they would rather all of their people starve than Black Americans get any of those benefits. And so when Black Americans began to get those benefits, they decided they would rather their people starve again, and that's the mode of welfare that we have today. So myths like these are just used to uphold that racism, to paint it like it's Black Americans' fault that, welfare is being paid out because the white Americans who created the welfare policies don't want Black Americans to have it, and they would rather punish their own poor white citizens than allow Black people to flourish.